Thanks, everybody. Welcome to Build. I'm your host, Ricky Camilleri. In 2011, 12-year-old Garrett Phillips was murdered inside his mother's apartment in Potsdam, New York. The police, without significant evidence, as stated by the judge in the case, pursued one suspect and one suspect only, Nick Hillary, a soccer coach, father, and ex-boyfriend of Phillips's mother. The murder and trial sent shockwaves through the small town and sowed divisions amongst the usually pleasant citizens. The new two-part documentary, Who Killed Garrett Phillips by Liz Garbus, pours over the case in shocking detail and takes viewers through the trial as it unfolds. Let's take a look.
The narrative of this case has been simple. It's about 30 minutes in Potsdam.
It was around 5 o'clock.
I got a phone call. Something's happened to Garrett.
I have both units on scene with an unresponsive 10-year-old male.
The scene was handled as a crime scene.
The mother is Tandy Cyrus.
Tandy's ex-boyfriend, Nick Hillary, was suspicious.
Garrett didn't like him. Those two butted heads.
We have a strong suspect at this point.
You're here to fix the wavy relationship. You've got some problems.
Hillary is responsible for Garrett's death.
No doubt in my mind he did it.
Nick Hillary.
Hillary. Nick's the guy.
I'm 100% certain.
Am I living in a dream right now, or this is really happening?
As a person of color, you're told, don't talk to the police.
Nick called me saying, the cops won't let me leave. You don't strip search someone naked for anything.
You do have to raise questions as to why they chose Nick Hillary.
He's right out of a movie. Nick's dating the sheriff's ex-girl.
You have John Jones holding Tandy's hand.
There have been theories that Garrett had been horsing around with friends. Those theories are pushed aside.
There's no match for the DNA, nothing tying Nick to the crime.
Prosecutors don't want to solve this case. They want to get a conviction.
To tell you I'm scared would be an understatement.
Either Nick Hillary did this, or someone else did this. Either one of those options are frightening.
Justice for Garrett is seeking the truth.
Everybody, please welcome lawyers for Nick Hillary, Norman Siegel and Mani Tafari, filmmaker Liz Garbus, and Nick Hillary. Let's hear it. Hi. Thank you so much for being here. Congratulations on this film. Congratulations on your freedom. I'm not sure the best way to put that, but you're a free man, and that is incredible. Liz, when did this, or Nick, just let's start right from the bat. You say at one point, and it was kind of in the trailer as well, where you say you feel like you're living in a dream. Like there's no way that this could be real, this daily life that you're going through as the trial was unfolding. So I have to ask, what does your life feel like now? Does it feel like you've gotten your life back, that you're out of that dream? Or in some ways, does it still feel like that dream is a major part of you?
No, that dream is definitely still a part of me. I cannot say with any great certainty when I would push forward from that and come back to what my life was prior, or even if that's even a possibility. But with each day, I continue to work through it, get the support of my legal team, my family, my friends, my loved one, everyone who has been a part of this whole journey in bringing me to the point where I am right now. I still continue to communicate with as I continue to work my way beyond this dark cloud.
Liz, your documentary in so many ways reminds me not just of other documentaries where we've seen of innocent men sort of railroaded, but stories of which where prosecution at a certain point realizes they don't have the necessary things to convict someone, and they just keep going forward. And then even after that, they feel like they have to continue to push. And we've seen that in other states where in order to stop defendants from suing them, they have to offer Alfred pleas to get them off death row. It's a horrific position to be put in. What was it like documenting these prosecutors? What was it like trying to get in there and talk to them when you had, I feel like, a certain idea as to how things were going?
Well, it started even way before the prosecutors got involved, because Mary Rain, who was the prosecutor, didn't get elected until 4 years after Garrett was murdered. So it was within 12 hours of Garrett losing his life that that many in the police force, discussions with the DA's office, had decided there was one person who could have done this crime, and he was right here. Didn't matter that Nick had an alibi, which would have made it nearly impossible for him to be in that place, and didn't matter that the whole thing just actually didn't make that much sense at all. But it was within that 12-hour period, and it's like they were driving down the road into tunnel vision, and they never turned left or right out of it. They went straight down.
We can assume why they made that decision within 12 hours, where that decision spawned from.
Well, so you're a police officer, a young boy is found dead in an afternoon. Of course, you're going to look at the ex-boyfriends, look at family members, perhaps look at school kids. So, sure, talk to Nick, talk to this long list of people who knew this child. But the problem was there was just really talk to Nick. I mean, it was really just that one person. The night that Garrett was murdered, one of the police officers who was on the case, who knew the family really well, went to the family's community, and they said, the family's emotions about who must have done this. They already had problems that their family member was dating him. The emotions just washed out any other possibilities.
Yeah.
And the one thing that can't be ignored is Nick is black.
Yes.
And again, in a place like New York, which I refer to as up south, we think of these kinds of racial overtones happening in Mississippi, Alabama, but clearly not in the liberal New York. But the reality is that the racial overtones occurs everywhere, including in upstate New York. And this case, without a doubt, had enormous racial overtones.
Mani, when did you get involved in the case?
I was involved in the case before the case happened. Nick and I went to college together. We won a national championship together. So, I was always involved. I knew Garrett Phillips. I knew the young man. I knew Tandy. So that's why I knew this whole thing was made up. I was on Rikers Island, actually, when I get the call. I'm an attorney, so I was working on Rikers Island.
And set up there. I saw what you did.
And
Ease it out.
I got the call, and I began driving. Nick told me, the cops just strip searched them. And I just hit the road, 87 North, and kept going. So I was involved immediately. And once I got up there, like I said in the movie, I believe, I saw how shocking this situation was. And we just rolled up our sleeves and we said, all right, it's a frame job. Let's get to work. We got to fight it.
Nick, that strip search, that whole interrogation, you play that out beautifully within the film. Not beautifully, but shockingly and in really horrifying detail as to how that unfolded. Nick, when you were sitting there with the cops who are obviously doing their cop thing and pretending to be your friend and have a conversation, but lead you down a certain path and sort of get you to give them certain answers that you actually don't have to give them, what were you thinking? Because at a certain point, they start acting as if you're threatening in some way.
Basically, at that point in time, I knew why they had asked me to come down. And the fact that we weren't getting to that point led me to believe there was ulterior motives. And
they asked him to look at a list of Garrett's friends, and they never brought the list.
Yeah.
Right, that's right. You keep asking, where is the list?
Exactly. It took about close to an hour before that list came out.
Oh, it did come, all right.
So it was a long back and forth. They just trying to do the good cop, the bad cop stuff all along. And, you saw, you've seen movies, you understand how it works. And, the reason why you asked me to come down is not the reason why the first 45 minutes to the first 60 minutes of the discussion, that came to the table. So immediately following that point in time.
But he doesn't have to stay there, you see.
Yeah.
Unless he could have made that decision, he made a wise decision, because that could have led, as he says in the film, to negative consequences for him. But for people watching, if you're called down and you go and you cooperate, your deprivation of liberty will occur when and if they arrest you. And theoretically, you can just say, I'm leaving.
That's what I mean. In and of itself, if the police bring you down under auspicious terms, or terms like, we want you to look at a list, and that list is not appearing, and they're not talking to you about that list, you can just leave, or is it in any way illegal for the police to lie to you about why they're bringing you to the police station?
I believe that it is improper. And second, the only time they can deprive you of your liberty through an arrest, for example, is when they have probable cause for the crime that they're going to charge you with. Nick, as people will see in the documentary, made the wise decision given his situation, because one of the police officers was blocking him physically from leaving. Right. And if there was an altercation, I always tell people, don't even have your pinky touch the cop, because then they're going to charge you with resist or assault and battery. So you have to be very disciplined, very smart in not falling for the bait to get yourself in more trouble.
And those charges can be used against you when you're in trial, I'm assuming as well, right?
Absolutely.
Indeed. One of the things is, and Liz puts this out there great, like, what's the problem with this case? Now, are the cops corrupt or are they just ignorant? And in this case, you saw both. You saw the fact that they were trying to frame him for a murder, but yet when he invoked his Sixth Amendment right, which is the right to counsel,
the guy didn't know what it was.
Did not know what it was. So really, you see that they're trying to play with his life here, but they're not sophisticated enough to frame someone properly, if you could even say that.
But you, as you say, you think about the Central Park Five, that they were expecting to be able to use these very basic techniques like that, maybe a kid would fall for it, but you had a military veteran. They were dealing with somebody who knew their rights.
So many people in this country, and even in New York, they do not know their rights. And so for the people in power take advantage of that. People in power very often are bullies, and therefore they sense out who doesn't know their rights, and they take advantage. So America, wake up, learn your rights, and exercise them.
Well, I was just going to say, just because they're Keystone Cops doesn't mean they don't have the power of the law on their side. I mean, sure, it was a bad frame, and they didn't do the best job of it, but it still took 5-6 years of your life away, 7 years of your life away, a pain that you're still dealing with. And yeah, you said $500,000.
And it ain't over.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so just because they didn't know what the Sixth Amendment was, they knew how to at least, really hurt you for a number of years of your life.
Most definitely. I mean, this is something that, like I stated in the documentary, for 20 years I've spent building my entire legacy up until that point, and within 20 minutes they have destroyed to a point in which now I'm trying to clear the rubble in the process of hoping to rebuild.
And what you don't know, if you haven't seen the documentary yet, is that Nick was an All-American soccer champion, was a graduate from St. Lawrence University, and became a coach at Clarkson, coaching I know nothing about soccer, but like a great soccer team. And
he was good at soccer. People
good at soccer, and
a military veteran,
and a military vet, and so all of this, Nick doesn't have any of that right now. His career is gone. His family has suffered extreme trauma. Nick's financial situation is not what it was before. I mean, it's not a happy ending.
It's important to note, I think, the cops may have been somewhat intellectually challenged, but the district attorney who prosecuted this case has been a district attorney for 3 decades. That's 30 years in New York. So we had intelligent people. That's why it took us $500,000 and almost sent him to jail, because we had intelligent people with a lot of power, working to deny him of his freedom, knowing he's innocent. So the DA we're speaking about, the Onondaga County DA, William Fitzpatrick, that's featured, he knew there was no evidence. And he said, quote, after Nick was acquitted, quote, "I've locked people up with much less evidence than this." And I'm thinking to myself, how many innocent men and women are currently sitting in jail or have died in jail, like Hector Rivas, who DA Fitzpatrick convicted 25 years ago. His conviction got overturned, but yet he died in jail 2 years ago because he couldn't afford bail before his retrial. Now, that's a person with family, Hector Rivas. He's a gentleman who died from Syracuse, and nobody remembers him because in 1991, 92, when Fitzpatrick convicted him, there was no internet. He didn't have someone like Sarah Johnson. He didn't have a brilliant lawyer like Norman Siegel and Earl Ward, and my wife, Lisa, representing him. So this guy died, and he didn't even make, front page news or back page news. because of people like this who for 30 years have been convicting people, as he said, with less evidence than he had against Nick Hillary.
Let me add.
Yeah, and can I just say, because many people haven't seen the doc yet, I mean, the evidence, there was no physical evidence.
No
Is that what
evidence.
you're about to say of Nick at the crime scene. There was none, zero. So I think that's just important base for people to
So people
to
to
know.
understand, there was no witness who came in to testify that saw Nick go into the building. No witness saw him come out of the building. There were no fingerprints of Nick. There was no DNA of Nick. There was no blood of Nick. And one of the themes in the trial was that you can't be in two places at one time. And so all this occurred within a 65-minute period. And at 5 o'clock, we had a witness saying where Nick was in his home. And then at 5:22, we had another witness saying Nick was where he was. And so when the death of this young child occurred, we had witnesses saying that Nick was somewhere else. So you can't be in two places at once. One thing I want to say, so it's not all negative, the unsung hero here is the judge. Yeah. The judge is from upstate New York, Phyllis Katina, and he did what judges are supposed to do. He listened to the evidence, and he judged based on being fair, on being impartial, and he had the strength and courage because he lives in North New York, and he did the right thing by finally coming in. And you'll see, I don't want to tell you the ending, but the ending is not guilty.
Wait, I thought you just said you weren't telling. I guess it's kind of obvious. But
You can Google it.
It had to be obvious. He's here. He's a free man.
The documentary, while I say it's wonderful when you get to the end, it's not about the ending. It's about the whole process of getting there, watching the legal system unfold the way that it does. You do a wonderful job. You're really upset.
Like, no, it is about the ending.
Great ending.
Liz, but I also think it's important for all of us to acknowledge here that it's not, Nick and his family were victims of this prosecutor gone amok, but there's been no justice for Garrett, right? And there's a grieving mother who went through an ordeal herself through this process, and there is no justice for Garrett. And he's a little boy who lost his life, and there is nobody serving time for that.
Well, because they refused to pursue any other leads regarding the case, right? I think the prosecution, after the trial is over, steps up in front of the cameras and says, "We're done. We're not going to pursue anybody else."
Not just that. The family stated themselves that after the acquittal, they picked up all the justice for Garrett signs and threw them away. So, when the community doesn't want justice for Garrett because justice doesn't mean, to lynch the brother man, there's not much you could do to put pressure from the outside. But we want justice for Garrett. And we were always saying from the beginning, the people supporting Nick really want justice, but real justice, right? Not just putting something fun out there and then, doing despicable deeds behind an angelic face of a little boy. We want real justice to solve this.
There is an element of that. We were talking about this backstage. There is an element of your story, Nick, where because of the rise of social media and the commenters and bloggers, all of a sudden the tensions across Potsdam and the surrounding towns became quite heightened. And instead of you having to go through this case, while in many ways social media may have helped you and gave you supporters as well and brought your story out there, it also turned lots of people extremely vicious in regarding you and turned it into a kind of team sport, it seems, around the town. What did that feel like for you going through that?
I mean, when you think about the power of social media in a very small town where everyone knows everyone, being in that spotlight where everyone knows who I am prior to the incident and even more so after the incident, it becomes pressurized. You going out, people pointing fingers at you. It becomes a very uncomfortable situation. And I think one of the statements I made in the documentary is that you have to calculate your every move in going out into the community and coming back in because it was that pressurized.
Right. Any move you make can be skewed or viewed in some way having to do with you being guilty or innocent.
And it was. I mean, yeah. Exactly. And he drove through a bank one day, and I mean, and it was, yeah.
to take.
Oh, that's right. You drove through. You went to an ATM or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, sorry.
It wasn't in the
Talk
film,
about
no,
it.
but that's great. Yeah, but right, it was criminalized his movements in the community. Yeah.
Did you feel? I mean, obviously there is an undercurrent, and Mani, you just kind of mentioned this of racism in regards to this case. Did you feel a racial animus from the police at the time or from the town, especially as the case continued to unfold?
Oh, most definitely.
And did you sense it in the town prior to this case, or do you feel like this case kind of just brought out what may have been lying dormant there?
It was always there. And one of the quiet kept secret is being an African American, but being a Jamaican African American, I was viewed slightly different than an African American that was born here. Right. You know, they always says, "Oh, you're not African American, you're Jamaican." So the blatant racism treatment that was there was never directed towards me until after the incident happened. Then I begin to feel it full pressured, as if I was an American born here, because that's the way they view me immediately within that spotlight, because they even said it, "Oh, he's not from here." So, you know, that was one of the key things they did, is to ostracize me from the community by saying, "Oh, he's not one of us." And it just begins to snowball from there.
Permission to demonize, basically.
Pretty much.
At that point.
Yes.
I think we have time for a couple questions from the audience. Who has it right here?
Hi there. I had a question for Liz. I was curious to know, how'd you hear about this case and what compelled you to tell the story, and how did you approach Nick to tell the story?
Well, you know, the role of journalism in this case is also really quite big. I mean, we're local journalists, Natasha Haverty from the local NPR station, and Bill Eckert from the Watertown Daily Times, who were on the story. And over time, that story from a local story broke out, and I read an article in the New York Times. The day that I read that article, I reached out to Nick's legal team, and ultimately ended up, I think it was in a Chinese restaurant in Queens. An Italian restaurant, meeting these guys. And, you know, they had been approached by a lot of different media and were, after that article, probably. So I sort of introduced, Mani had seen some work that I had done and introduced Nick to some of the films, and started talking from there about why I was interested in the case. And then, of course, I reached out to people in the community, in the town, law enforcement there as well. But I also knew it was going to start with these guys.
I just have to say, trust is everything. And meeting Liz and knowing her work before, like immediately I told Nick, I said, Liz Garbus will tell your story and she will tell the truth, because her work precedes her and all you have is your reputation. And when I met Liz, I've said this before, I was expecting a big time Hollywood Oscar director, and she's down to earth, and she just wanted the truth. And that's what we gave her, and I think the documentary reflects that.
And also, she got it. And to future journalists or people who want to make documentaries, not only do you need the skills, but you have to understand the subject that you're addressing, both personally and individually, but also systemically. And Liz Garbus got it 100% correct.
Most definitely.
You sound like an advertisement for Liz, and if that's his, so be it.
Keep it
So
coming.
it
I
be.
love it.
Liz Garbus gets it correct.
Yes.
Hashtag.
Well, Liz, you know, I'm curious what you think. We're living in this age of true crime stories, true crime documentaries. That's what people are saying, at the very least. I feel like we've kind of always had true crime in our life. I mean, in terms of what we watch, but we're living in this age where people can kind of expand on the stories and tell them with depth. What does that feel like to be someone who is a journalist, who is telling a story with depth, but within this sort of weird golden age of true crime, whatever that means?
I have a little bit of a bone to pick about the whole notion of true crime. Well, first of all, I want to say I'm a filmmaker, and I don't consider myself a journalist. Journalists do something different. I mean, and I've spent a lot of time with journalists, and I've spent a lot of time with myself. So I know we have very different processes. And I think that, you know, I've been making films about the criminal justice system since I started as a filmmaker, and other people were making films before me about the criminal justice system as a filmmaker. And there's now this is put in the category of true crime because it's kind of a brand that covers all of these things. I don't really know what that means. I mean, I think it's great if it helps popularize stories of our justice system. But I mean, to me, I made a film called The Farm that Mani mentioned, and about inmates in Louisiana State Penitentiary. I've been interested in making films about the justice system, and crime is a part of it. But I don't know, to me, it's like these films have always existed, and now we kind of call them this one thing, and I think it's a little bit limiting, although I'm glad that it broadens the audience.
But I want to point out, I think our justice system is unjust. And I think the beauty of what we're talking about now, and I go back to the theme that I said earlier, most people don't know not only what their rights are, but what's actually happening in our constitutional system. I give a speech every once in a while, the constitutional system, we should try it sometime. The more that HBO, Verizon, everybody puts a focus on what's going on, and the more the public learns what's going on, we can win people over to changing the system. The system doesn't have to continue to be as unjust as it is now, and especially disproportionately on people of color and poor people. And if we want to change it, despite what's going down in Washington right now with our 45th president, we need to learn what's going on and then change it. Don't accept the status quo. We can change it for the better.
And the genre, I think, is true justice, with apologies to Brian Stevenson. What Liz did here is not true crime. This is true justice. Because Liz has opened people's eyes, this crime that involves a 12-year-old boy can be solved. It's a solvable crime. And this is justice. This is what you do as a filmmaker or a journalist or a lawyer, right? We all do this as someone in the press. This is something that's different, right? This is something that we can make positive change. And there's one person who's still waiting to rest in peace. After poor Garrett died, not only did they not solve his crime, but they turned his memory into something ugly. Garrett can still get justice. And I think what Liz has done is the closest thing since October 24, 2011, that can really bring about the justice. So this is true justice, this genre, not true crime.
One more question.
Hi, my question's for Mani. I was wondering if you went to law school to be a public defender or how you fell into this legal track?
I did, actually. I did go to law school because I wanted to defend people. And I found that Nick and I would have these conversations. You know, he'd come by, we'd talk about the Scottsboro Boys, we talk about the Central Park Five. And after a while, it's like, you know, what are we doing? What am I going to do now, you know, to punch the shitstem in the gut and bring some justice out there? So
Did you just call it the shitstem?
Yes.
Intentionally?
Yes.
I've never heard that, and I love it.
So the fact that they try to frame my best friend for murder, it was almost like, well, yeah, I think I made the right choice. But a lot of young people are here. Norman Siegel has a couple of students in the audience right now, and they're future lawyers back there, and they're the ones who are going to make sure that stuff like this doesn't happen in the future.
And journalists, by the way. I mean, look at Jeffrey Epstein's case, right? Like, reason like that there's some justice with this serial predator is because of journalists saying on the case, the justice system, as you guys have said, did not work. It was corrupted by money. And you know, journalism, lawyers, everyone's needed.
And just to dovetail to what Norm had mentioned earlier on, I think one of the things that we could actually do to begin to implement immediate changes, especially within the DA's office, is to create a term limit. It's one of the only elected office that there's no term limit. And, you know, as Mani had mentioned before, you have DAs who sits in these office for decades. And what that does, it just breeds corruption. I mean, our IS office has a term limit. So I think every elected office should have a term limit, and that, when in its own right, will start to eradicate some of the corruption that breeds from not having a term limit.
Nick, I'm curious, before I let you guys go, what was it like to watch the film?
It was very emotional, and it brought about a lot of relief as well as a lot of high and low emotions. Just to see everything being captured over the course of 3 hours and about 7 minutes, you know, it was really riveting for me personally, yes.
Well, congratulations on the film. Thank you so much for coming in. Incredible work, you guys. It premieres on HBO. Is it Monday night? Excuse me?
23rd.
July 23rd. July 23rd, Tuesday, excuse
First
me.
part Tuesday, second part Wednesday.
Amazing. It's called Who Killed Garrett Phillips, Tuesday, July 23rd on HBO. Everybody give them a huge round of applause for being here. Let's hear it.